Hey there, Smite fans, and welcome into the SPL waiting room as we get ready for week number 4 of Phase 2 in the SPL. I'm Agro. I'll be your host as per usual. And as per usual, we've got a pretty sick show for you here this week. We got some changes coming in, a patch that might not change too much, but could also potentially change more than you think. We'll have some people joining us to talk about that in just a little bit. And of course, the battle of the bottom happening to kick us off here today. We've got Obey versus Z United. One team will find a win. I think legally we're supposed to have a winner, but maybe they found some way. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But I want to start off with my thoughts on who's on the other end of the spectrum right now in the SPL, and that's Ghost Gaming. Ghost looked absolutely monstrous last week, unstoppable even, to the point where a lot of fans are really buying into the hype train. I had one fan in one of my Smite game streams tell me that they thought that Ghost was going to go undefeated the rest of the phase from now until like November. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think that Ghost is on a very impressive trajectory. The thing that they need to work on is making sure when they don't get these early leads that they're still able to be as explosive in the mid game as they currently are. But you look across the board at that Ghost roster, man, they look pretty unstoppable right now. Though I will say in the game 2 against SSG, I was just rewatching it earlier this morning, Twig really wanted to make sure that they dropped a game up against SSG there. Twig had a little bit of a rough start, but when the rest of the team is playing as well as they are, that's kind of the luxury that you get, is that one player can have a tough game and still look pretty dominant by the end game. So I'm really looking forward to next week in particular. Next Friday, a week from today, we will have Ghost versus Radiance, the other team that's currently undefeated, though they have to test their mettle up against Space Station later on this week. We'll see if they're able to handle SSG as well as Ghost did. I'm not sure that's going to be the case, but alas, we just have to wait. Now, I do want to ask, because we've got some new gods coming back into the game. Both Artio and Hera were removed because of bugs. They're now back in this update. What god do you guys think will see more SPL play this week? Do you think it'll be Artio or Hera? Two different gods, but I think we're going to see both. I just wonder which one we're going to see more of. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'll also be asking both Finch and Hindu Man, who will be joining us on the other side, of getting caught up on last week's SPL games. Of course, told by Dave and Finch and written by Finch and Dave.
Well, it's time for another SPL weekly recap with Finch and Dave. We're going to be going through Phase 2, Week 3, and I'll start things off with Ghost versus PK. And spoiler alert, it was a quick week, and set 1 on Friday between Ghost and the Knights was no exception. A few precedents are set throughout the games here. Fine OK will make you sad if you give him Cthulhu. Twig is really starting to roll. PBM is good. Hera is still bae. Come back to me, please. And the list goes on. It's the perfect start to the week in the phase so far for Ghost Gaming, who are clearly here to play, and the rest of the league needs to get out of their way.
And even though Renegades have been looking competitive, it was Space Station who were in control of the set from start to finish. And even then, I'm not giving the credit where it's due. This set was owned by Cherio, Nika, and Dardes. Take that for sale sign down, it's theirs. They just might be the scariest 3-on-3 combination in the league, I agree, and unfortunately the Renegades got a front row seat.
Yeah, to kick off Saturday, Radiance and Obey would go toe-to-toe. It's Radiance looking to keep the undefeated streak alive, and Obey hoping to strike for the first win of the phase. Radiance do take the set 2-0, but I will take a second to give Obey their due credit. They took Radiance, one of 2 undefeated teams remaining, to the limit in Game 2 after Wowie and Sino put in good performances. Unfortunately, Cyclone on Cupid would go untouched, and the same can be said for Benji on Sun Wukong out of solo.
Sanguine seemed locked in for their set against the United. Shinto in particular had a monster performance on Merlin in Game 1, racking up over 26,000 player damage in a 30-minute game. Late game Smite is still Sanguine's time though. A sneaky horse ult from Rongyu allowed Sanguine to crash the party and seal up a 2-0 victory and round out the day on Saturday.
Game 1, PBM rolls out the Geb, and the world is left in disbelief as the low early pressure, I put that in quotes, support pick just steamrolls Nika in the solo lane with some help from Sam. This game was incredible to watch from a strategy perspective. Ghost showed us time and time and time again what they wanted to do, and they just kept doing it. By the end of it, Twig was aiming for a Game 3, but the rest of Ghost dragged him over the finish line, and the spotless record is continued thanks to flawless play by Ghost.
Netrioid and Panatom popped all the way off, not halfway, all the way off on Rom and Mercury, and were eventually able to force a Game 1 win. Game 2 was, if possible, even more of a nail-biter. They defend their Titan and try to make their own counter-push to the end, but Sanguine holds them off, especially Rongyu, and allows Fire Minions to win the game for them. Vamos Minions, vamos Sanguine, and that wraps up Week 3 of Phase 2 of Season 7 here in the SPL. And that's our recap as written by Finch and Dave, and then as told by Dave and Finch. Thank you all for watching. Here's to watching week number 4.
As always, you guys can catch that SPL recap in its entirety on the SMITEPro YouTube. Highly recommend you go and check that one out. But you don't have to go right now, because if you were looking for more John Finch, he's right here on the SPL Rating Room alongside the fearless Hindu Man. Fellas, look, new patch has come out. It is now 7.8. The Tsukiyomi patch, the reign of terror of the moon god is kind of upon us in the casual scene. Though in competitive, of course, he's not available quite yet. There were some changes specifically to some warriors. We saw some Achilles there in that highlight of what Ghost was doing, but Cucullin also receiving some buffs over there in that short lane. Hindu, we can start with you. I want to ask you about this Cucullin, because I feel like we're starting to see a little bit more of him already, and now this patch hits. How do you think this affects him?
Realistically, it's a 1 second cooldown on his main clear ability, the Barb Spear, right? So when you think about that ability in itself, it doesn't feel like a lot, but the amount of rotations you're going to have of this ability up means it's up more often for more poke damage, for more clear potential. He was already getting picked anyway was the key there, I think, Ryan. We saw a little bit of Fine OK picking it into Cthulhu as well, and I think the most dominant situation in solo lane has been Cthulhu versus Amaterasu, and who can go against those two specific gods most of the time? And Cucullin is definitely one of those that's getting picked up a little bit more often. I think the love he's received in a couple of patches now has spurred the way for him to come back into action, and I think this is just going to be another nod in that direction once again. It's not a huge nod overall, but every second counts in Smite, as people have shown time and again. I think this is just another reason to look at Cucullin if we're going to see Amaterasu and Cthulhu band away.
He's just one of those pressure picks that you can go to pretty consistently, it feels like, in that solo lane. And the other guy who's kind of competing for that same slot, it feels like, Finch, is Achilles. We're starting to see a lot more Achilles, in particular against that Cthulhu, realizing that 100 is zeroing that dude, whatever he's got, all that damage mitigation is very, very difficult. Now you feel like you can use the execute, and now with the buff on the shield of Achilles is 1, getting some more base damage. How much more do you think we'll see of him?
I think there's a good chance that we'll see a lot more of Achilles. For me, with the solo laners right now, there's only a few things you need to check off of your list. They need to be able to defend their blue buff from invade so you don't give up a bunch of early pressure. They need to be able to contest up against the other two top picks in Cthulhu and Amaterasu. And they need tons of backline threat potential to those carries when they actually get back there. And I think Achilles checks all of those boxes as far as I'm concerned here, Aggro. Especially as you mentioned, that execute, it gives him so much extra potential to shut down the Cthulhu. But it's not just that. I think that Achilles, sort of in general, opens up a lot of different avenues for these solo laners to play to get back there to the back line and shut down some of these hyper carry mages before they can get too far out of control. Some of these hyper carry hunters that are back there as well. Not be surprised, especially if Cthulhu and Amo are getting banned more consistently, if we see a lot more of this guy.
I think that I completely agree with what you're saying, because I do think Achilles is one of those picks that probably deserved a little bit more experimentation before the buff. And now after the buff, I think we'll certainly start to see him. 20 base damage at every rank is pretty substantial in the grand scheme of things. So I think that we'll see a lot of that Achilles. Now, on to what we asked Chad about a little bit earlier. Artio and Hera both rejoining the fray, kind of like having new gods brought into competitive because they were gone for a whole patch. Let's start with Artio, because chat does not seem to favor this goddess being picked up in competitive. And Hindu, as the resident Guardian player, I wonder if you agree.
So, I think the conversation is, funny enough, when we did the vote, I thought it was going to be like across the season, not just the week. and I'm going to state that clearly. I think it's going to be a bit of a ramp for both Hera and RTO to see play over time, but in the long run, and knowing the players, and you think about the Hera and RTO specifically, there's a lot of players that have picked RTO before, Aurora and PBM, two standout players in the support role that like to play aggressive. But think about the meta right now, Aggro. Think about how the meta is played. Getting to level 2 early on Guardians is something that we're seeing a little bit more of, and guess who's got one of the best level 2s in the game? RTO. 2 abilities becomes 4 abilities at level 2. That's a big swing. The engage, the kill potential in that lane is going to go through the roof. And then you factor in, we've got the likes of a Nemesis back in action too. If Nemesis back in action, one thing that she's really good at is slows, and slows are consistent and cause problems. How do you deal with slows? Well, A, it's sprint, or B, it's leaps and escapes. Have a cripple field on your team, ain't no one escaping now.
I completely agree with you, man. I think that RTO. I had it right the first time. She's going to see a ton of play, man, because the level 2 power spike in support is so unbelievably important right now. If you don't know what we're talking about, why have you not been watching SPL Waiting Room? You can go back and watch the old ones on YouTube, because we covered how you hit level 2 wave 1 as a support and how that brings you kill pressure. I think RTO will see play because of that alone. Finch, on the other side of the coin, chat seems to really think that Hera's going to see play, though it's always tied to one name, and that's Dardes. Do you feel like it's going to continue to be an only Dardes pick?
I'm not so sure. I felt a lot more confident before I realized chat was this much on my side. That's not always a great sign. But I'll be honest, I think the reason that we're going to see more of Hera is because she does some of the things I think your mid lane mage needs to do really well, in that she has great survivability when she's being dived between the Divine Shroud, which gives her the movement speed, and obviously the shield, and obviously being able to drop Arcus on herself. I think that Hera has a ton of potential to get some of these aggressive junglers off her, and then she still does plenty of backline damage that you need from your mage as well. She checks a lot of those boxes. I don't think it'll just be Dardes that ends up playing this pick, especially because I feel like right now the mid lane mage pool is actually pretty shallow. Adding someone versatile like Hera who provides another bulky body could certainly shake things up.
I think that's a good point. And you got to keep in mind that early pressure always important in Smite. Hera has some of the best mage wave clear you can have early in the game. It's a little bit risky because she has to step up to the wave to use it, but it is certainly a valuable tool for her. And I'm sure that's why chat voted overwhelmingly for Hera, the level 3 full clear that she has available. I'm sure you were all thinking about that. 78% feel like Hera is going to see more play. I wonder if I had phrased the question, though, non-Dardes mid laners playing Hera, if that would have been different.
In fairness, I will say, like, Venenu and Hurrywind are 2 other names that scream to me when I think of Hera as well. But then when you think of RTO as an example, PBM, Aurora, and then you've also got Inbound that's happy to play aggressive gods. That's one that I'm expecting him to see. And even Snoopy too, new to the support role. Snoopy likes to play aggressive. You've seen him trying to do this Cthulhu. Wouldn't surprise me to see a bit of RTO. Maybe not today, but I think in the long run, RTO will see more flavor picks over the fact of Hera.
Makes sense to me. Well, we already talked about the most iconic Hera duo, and that's Dardes, but Dave really wants to be the one that's talked about in tandem with Hera, so I'll do my best to do that for him here, because he sat down recently with the Renegades in order to do one of our team check-ins. Here's a little preview.
Wait, should I change my webcam to glasses?
Oh, just angle it on the side?
Oh, that won't work. I look good from this angle?
Whoa.
Shake. You ready?
I call dibs on posting that to the Contagious Laughter subreddit. That's my karma, and no one else is taking it. Because how could you not laugh along?
Helium in that room is just filled with helium, right? That must
Just
be
wait
what
till
it
your
is.
cake day, Aggro.
Yeah, that's the right way to do it, Finch. You know how to read it. Nicely done by you. Let's take a look at what we've got coming up here in the SPL this week, because it feels like we could say this every single week. It's going to be a good one, because they all are right now. But especially this opening match is one that I've been looking forward to, between E United and Obey. Look, these guys have both struggled up until now, but when you're 0-4 and there's another team that's 0-4, maybe another team that's 0-4, you can constantly tell yourself internally, well, we might be losing, but we aren't losing as bad as those guys. Like we're going to beat them whenever we play them. Well, now it's time to put your money where your mouth is, right? And one team is going to have to find a win this week.
Definitely, and I think the funny thing about this matchup is it's put up or shut up time for both these two teams right now. I'm very excited that I'm on the cast because I'm just going to call it as it is this time, because there's been a lot of talk about pros getting upset with commentary. We generally hold back quite a bit, but for this one, in my eyes, I'm kind of the opinion of like, you know what, spade's a spade at this point in time. You're going to be bottom of the league. You've got no more excuses. You are playing against the other bottom team of the league. If you can't beat them, you're bottom of the league, and that's not a shot at Obey. It's just as equal to United, because I think on paper, both these teams have had an opportunity to take games off decent opposition that they are expected to beat. Renegades for Obey, they could have beaten them, in my opinion. Renegades are on that train, and United had a game set against PK, which they also lost. They're teams that should be trying to take it on.
Well, we'll see if we can get your name title on the graphic for the Savage back for this cast, Hindu. But first, we got to talk about the
Savage?
match.
I don't know.
On the other end of the spectrum that we're going to look at is SSG and Radiance, two teams that have found a lot of success so far here in this phase, and now face up against one another later on in the week. SSG is coming off their first loss at the hands of Ghost, and a pretty thorough one, at least in game one of that set. Finch, how do you think that this set is going to play out?
This is going to be a big one, and I think that there might be a little bit more on the line here for Space Station than for Radiance Aggro, because, as you mentioned already, Space Station are the team that lost to Ghost already. If they end up losing to Radiance too, I think that pretty definitively puts them a little bit of a step down below Ghost and Space Station. But as far as how the actual matchup is going to go, this is one that I think could easily be decided by the supports between Raffer and Aurora. I think they're both such impactful players for their squads. Raffer maybe a little bit more inconsistent than Aurora. We always know Aurora's going to show up, and sometimes you get a different kind of Raffer. That's why I'm looking towards that role. Is Aurora going to be getting to play his Yamojas, his Hercules, or are they going to be able to take those picks away from him? That's the kind of stuff I'm looking at if SSG want this win.
The way I view this matchup, Radiance wants to go pretty late. SSG wants to kind of play the mid game. They aren't a fast starting team, but I do think that they ramp up a little bit more quickly than Radiance typically does. Hindu, do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I think the one thing with Space Station, though, is that they like to play for the mid-game, as you say, I would say. But what they also do is draft pretty effectively for the late game, too, to give them that sort of get-out clause of if the mid-game doesn't go as well as they wanted to because maybe their early gets further behind, you see them lean a little bit more in their picks towards a couple of late-game gods. This replay, for example, you've got, Jingwei and Carly, right? So it's a good example of, where these guys look to try and set themselves. Their mid-game is generally where they like to try and turn up the gas, but if they're behind early, expect them to be happy to draw it out late, too. I don't know, though, right? I mean, looking at how I've seen Space Station play so far this phase, they seem a little bit lackadaisical in play for me, and they've dropped a couple of games I expected them to do a lot better at. I'm not trying to downplay their opposition because I think their opposition stepped up, but I don't feel like Space Station has really been on their top of their game for a couple of weeks now, and it's against a team like Radiance, they really have to show that this week.
Well, maybe Hera coming back is the missing piece of that puzzle for Space Station. That remains to be seen. We got to take a look at how our predictions have gone so far, by the way, before we get into the nitty-gritty of our set that we're going to talk about the most. Because John Finch is up top, 89%. That's pretty good, Finch. You're kind of raking in those viewer points.
Yeah, it's really not that hard. Just follow along with Finch and his predictions, and you cannot go wrong. It's just kind of a prescription, I think, for those out there who are watching. If you need advice, come to me.
Okay, well, here's where you can copy Finch's homework, so to speak. We're all feeling like Radiance is going to beat Renegades later on today, which I do think could be a pretty interesting set and pretty split on this E United Obey thing. And you might notice that my pick is missing, and that's because I decided to give you guys a shot at convincing me of your own picks. You might have noticed that Hindu Man and Finch are split down the middle on this one. Finch, you've got Obey Alliance, and as the debate master, I think I have to give Hindu Man the advantage of responding to you rather than the other way around. Convince me why I should vote for Obey Alliance.
It's really easy in my mind. I think the best player when those 10 players line up into the lobby is Sino on Obey, which makes it pretty easy for me to vote for that squad. But that's not the only reason. I think that mid lane for Obey has a chance to be a pretty strong combination when you factor how well Wolfie and Sino have been playing together. Plus, you have to think about the fact that E United have played a little bit inconsistently. I think there are times when you have to call Scream the best player out there, but then there's other times where Scream is kind of the detriment to the squad. He's hit or miss for me. It's just that when he hits, he really hits. As long as Sino plays, I think, relatively consistently and is able to help Obey get off to a really good start, that mitigates some of the weaknesses for them, which is Obey's duo lane, where I think that Bobby and Wowie have struggled at times. If Sino can get them off to a good start, that won't matter. Their team fight presence has been fine. It's been the laning phase, some of those early struggles where they've run into some issues.
Okay, convincing, but I'm not sure I'm willing to put my vote in just yet. Hindu Man, what's the argument for United here?
We could go by stats. We could go by the state of the team's mentality.
They're both 0-4, Hindu, come on.
Games too. Yeah, but statistically wise, the KDA is different. Listen, Sano's a great player, and I will recommend that Sano's there. But if you look at these two teams on paper, they match up very, very effectively. I think the duo lane out of Obey have struggled with Bobby and Wowie really getting on the same page. Same can be said, though, for Snoopy and Guy J, because, Guy J new to the league, Snoopy new in a new role. That matchup up well. Scream versus Sino, nice little matchup there. Solo lane, Variety versus Ducky, the standout star of potentially both teams. When you take out the junglers, it matches up well there. But the one thing I will allude to is that Obey have been in a rut for a while, and it's hurting their mentality too now. Like, they're really starting to get in their own head about these performances. It's very reminiscent of, funny enough, what Barracuda has said recently about his time playing last year, where everything seemed to go right in scrims. They think they're doing everything, but when it came to game day, they couldn't find a win. And I think Obey are still stuck in that hole here. I'm hoping not. I want a 3-game set here today, honestly. That's the dream scenario for both these teams. But the worst case of this, I still feel United are going to come out on top, because Obey, when they do get to those winning positions, have dropped games that they should have won by bad decision making as a team overall, and I would like to see that improve today. I'm hoping it is, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to happen here. If anything, E United are going to have a bit of a chip on their shoulder, knowing they're against Obey. It should be their game to win. And then statistics.
Yeah, Finch, I think that the big thing that's hanging me up on voting for Obey is the Phase 1 success and the high points that we've seen from E United, because we've seen them take games off of better competition and sets because of it. Do you think that it's just this little bit of a swap, Snoopy from ADC to support and Guy J in, that's making you think Obey is going to take it here?
I mean, that's certainly part of it. I think that Snoopy has looked pretty inconsistent to me in the support role. He's really struggled, even on really strong picks like the Cthulhu. I actually think Guy J has looked great in the moments where he's been allowed to actually compete on an even field. For me, the only reason, I mean, not the only reason, but the biggest reason is I don't think that Obey have anywhere else to look except for this set. If they're going to show us what they've got, if they're going to rush to the defense when criticism comes, they have nowhere else to go except this set here. If they don't win it, there's nothing left to say, there's nothing left in the tank, there's nothing else to consider. They've lost to all of them, right? So they have to win this game as far as I'm concerned.
It's hard for Obey, though, too, because when you look at the state of the league, too, this is the team that they have to beat because they're on an even keel. The rest of the season's not going to get any easier for them. Sure, we get repeats of games, but it's going to be a lot of work, honestly, for this Obey team to really, grind up, and I'm hoping they do well today. I'm not trying to sledge on the boys more than anything else. I'm not trying to slight them. I'm just being realistic of, where they are currently versus E United. I do think this is their best matchup they could hope for, so I'm hoping for a stronger performance out of Obey. But E United, I think, just has a better overall decision making come late game if the game's at an even situation between the two. I think this is going to come down to who makes the mistakes most, which, funny enough, is all what Smite's about. So who's going to make the most mistakes loses.
Fair enough. Well, I don't know if you have to sledge on them, Hindu Man, because Scream and Variety will likely be building some sledges today. And I'm ready to weigh in and make my choice. I think Finch, the better debater, but ultimately had the worst position. I'm going E United here today. Though I agree that it's going to be pretty close, I would not be surprised to see this one go 3 games at all. But I just think we've seen a higher high end from E United. And until Obey is able to put a whole entree course on the table, I'm eating at E United's dinner table. That's all I'm going to say. So E United might be able to find their first win here.
I've never, just to be clear, I have never rooted for it to be wrong before as hard as I am today. That's just what I'm going to say. I really want Obey to come out slamming and just beat down E United. And then we're like, okay, E United is the donkey team of the league. Now we're going to all talk about them being the donkeys and then having to step up and fix things. They have the caveat, though, remember, Ryan, of they've just made a roster change this split. Obey got that with the Sino change earlier on this year. They played that one out now. It's time for them to step it up. Guy J's the new member, but he did well. What can Bobby do, though?
Well, we'll see if Hindu Man's rooting is a blessing or a curse for Obey pretty shortly here. Don't have to wait around too much longer. Thanks so much for watching The Waiting Room. It's time to get started with the SPL.